You sit quietly, but your mind doesn't. The body slows down with age. But the thoughts? They become louder. Regret. Memories. What if? Why didn't I? What will happen next? And suddenly, peace feels far away. But here is something most people never understand. Overthinking is not caused by old age. It is caused by a mind that was never trained. And the Buddha saw this long before us. As the years pass, something subtle begins to change. Life becomes quieter, not always in a bad way, but in a way that reveals things that were once hidden beneath movement and distraction. The noise of the world slowly fades, and in its place, another kind of noise begins to rise, the noise of the mind. When you were younger, your attention was constantly pulled outward. There were things to chase, responsibilities to carry, people to impress, problems to solve. Even if the mind was restless, life did not give it much space to show itself fully. It stayed busy, scattered, moving from one thought to another without ever being clearly seen. But old age removes many of those distractions. It creates space, and in that space, the mind finally becomes visible. This is where many people become confused. They think overthinking has suddenly started because they are getting older. They believe something is going wrong with them now, as if age itself has created this storm of thoughts. But that is not the truth. The truth is far deeper and far more honest. The mind you are experiencing now is the same mind you have always had. It has not changed. It has only become more visible because life is no longer covering it up. What you are facing in old age is not a new problem, but an old habit that was never understood. The Buddha explained this with great clarity. He taught that the untrained mind naturally moves toward restlessness, toward attachment, toward repetition. It clings to memories, it creates stories, it jumps between past and future without ever settling into the present moment. And if this pattern continues for years, even decades, it becomes strong. It becomes automatic. So when life finally slows down, the mind does not become peaceful. It becomes louder. It replays old conversations again and again, as if trying to fix something that can no longer be changed. It creates endless what-if scenarios, imagining different outcomes, different lives, different versions of the past that never happened. It drifts into the future, creating fears about things that have not yet come, building anxiety out of pure imagination. And all of this feels real. It feels important. It feels urgent. But in reality, it is just the mind doing what it has always been trained to do. This is the part most people never realize. They try to stop overthinking by fighting their thoughts, by forcing the mind to be quiet, by becoming frustrated with themselves for not being able to control it. But this only creates more tension, more resistance, and more suffering, because the problem is not the presence of thoughts. The problem is the relationship you have with them. If, for years, you have believed every thought, followed every mental story, reacted to every feeling without awareness, then the mind has learned that it is in control. It has learned that whatever it produces will be taken seriously, without question. So it continues, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it has never been shown another way. In Buddhist understanding, the mind is not an enemy, it is simply conditioned. It reflects what it has practiced over time. Just as the body becomes shaped by repeated movements, the mind becomes shaped by repeated patterns of thinking. If it has practiced worry, it becomes skilled at worry. If it has practiced regret, it becomes skilled at regret. If it has practiced fear, it becomes skilled at fear. And when old age arrives, those skills do not disappear. They reveal themselves more clearly. This is why overthinking feels stronger now, not because you are weaker, but because the illusion has become thinner. You are finally seeing the mind without distraction, without interruption, without escape. And although this can feel uncomfortable, even overwhelming, it is also something else. It is an opportunity. For the first time, you are able to observe what has always been there. You are able to see the patterns, the loops, the habits of thought that once controlled you without your awareness. And in seeing them clearly, something begins to shift, because awareness changes everything. When you begin to notice that a thought is just a thought, not a command, not a truth, not something you must follow, its power starts to weaken. When you see that the mind is repeating old patterns, not revealing absolute reality, you create a small distance between yourself and the noise. And in that distance, even if it is very small at first, there is the beginning of peace. The Buddha did not teach people to destroy the mind or silence it completely. He taught them to understand it, to observe it, to see its nature clearly without becoming trapped inside it. Because once you understand something deeply, you are no longer controlled by it. So what you are experiencing now, this constant thinking, this restlessness, this endless movement of the mind, is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that the mind is finally visible to you. And that visibility, if approached with patience and awareness, becomes the first step toward freedom. Not by stopping thoughts, but by no longer being owned by them. Why thoughts become stronger with age? As life moves forward, something very quiet yet very powerful begins to unfold. It is not something you can touch or measure, but you can feel it clearly if you pay attention. The outer world slowly becomes less demanding, less chaotic, less noisy. And at first, this seems like a gift. More rest, more silence, more time. But what most people do not expect is what comes with that silence. Because when the world becomes quieter, the mind does not automatically follow. In fact, for many people, the opposite happens. The mind begins to speak more. Not because it's suddenly changed, but because for the first time, it is no longer being drowned out by constant activity. For years, maybe even decades, your attention was pulled outward. You woke up with responsibilities. You moved through your day reacting to situations, solving problems, interacting with people, chasing goals. Even if the mind was restless underneath, it was covered by movement. Now that movement has slowed, and in that stillness, the mind finally takes center stage. It begins to revisit everything it has stored. Moments you forgot, words you wish you had said differently, decisions that shaped your life, people who came and went. The mind becomes like a storyteller that never stops speaking. It moves through your past, searching for meaning, trying to fix what cannot be fixed, replaying scenes as if repetition could somehow change the outcome. And when it is not lost in the past, it travels to the future. It creates images of what might happen. It builds fears out of uncertainty. It asks questions that have no clear answers. It tries to predict, to control, to prepare for things that may never even arrive. This constant movement between past and future is exhausting, and yet it feels almost impossible to stop. Because the mind has been trained this way for a lifetime, the Buddha described this nature of the mind very simply. He said, "The untrained mind is like a restless monkey, jumping from branch to branch, never staying still. It is always reaching, always reacting, always moving." When you are young, you do not notice this clearly because life moves at the same speed. The outer chaos matches the inner chaos, so it feels normal. But in old age, something changes. The body slows down, the environment becomes quieter, the pace of life softens, and suddenly, the difference becomes clear. The world is calm, but the mind is not. This contrast creates discomfort. It creates tension. It creates the feeling that something is wrong, even though nothing external is actually disturbing you. You may sit in a peaceful room, surrounded by silence, and yet inside there is noise, movement, pressure. This is the moment many people begin to struggle. They try to fill the silence again. They turn on the television, scroll endlessly, distract themselves with anything that can pull them away from their own thoughts, not because they enjoy it, but because they are trying to escape what is happening within. But the more you escape, the stronger the pattern becomes. Because avoidance is also a form of training. Every time you run from your thoughts, the mind learns that it is something powerful, something overwhelming, something you cannot face. And so it continues with even more intensity. The Buddha's teaching points to something completely different. He did not say to run from the mind. He said to understand it. He taught that this movement between past and future is the root of suffering, because it pulls you away from the only place where life is actually happening, the present moment. But the present moment is very simple. It is just this breath, this sensation, this moment of being alive. And for a mind that is used to complexity, to stories, to endless thinking, this simplicity feels almost uncomfortable. So it escapes again, back to memory, back to imagination, back to noise. This is why overthinking feels stronger with age. Not because you are becoming weaker, but because you are finally noticing the true nature of the mind without distraction. And this realization can go in two directions. It can become a source of suffering if you resist it, if you fight it, if you believe that something is wrong with you. Or it can become a doorway to awareness. Because for the first time, you are seeing clearly how the mind operates. You are seeing its patterns, its habits, its endless loops. You are no longer completely lost inside it. And in that seeing, there is power. Not the power to control every thought, but the power to stop being controlled by them. This is a very subtle shift, but it changes everything. Instead of being pulled into every memory, you begin to notice, this is just a memory. Instead of being trapped in every fear, you begin to see, this is just a thought about the future. And slowly, without force, without struggle, the grip of overthinking begins to loosen. Because the mind loses its power when it is seen clearly. And what once felt overwhelming becomes something you can simply watch. Like clouds passing through the sky, they come, they stay for a moment, and then they disappear. And you remain quietly aware, quietly present, quietly free. You are not your thoughts. At a certain point in life, especially in old age, a question begins to rise, sometimes quietly, sometimes with great intensity. Why can't I stop thinking? And beneath that question, there is another, even deeper one. Why do these thoughts feel like me? This is where the real confusion begins. Not in the thoughts themselves, but in the identity we give to them. Because for most of our lives, we never question the mind. Whatever appears inside it, we accept as truth. Whatever voice speaks, we assume it is our own. Whatever story unfolds, we step into it without hesitation. If a thought says, I made mistakes, we feel regret. If a thought says, I am afraid, we feel fear. If a thought says, my life could have been different, we feel sadness. And it all feels real because we never stop to ask, who is thinking? The Buddha's insight begins exactly here. He did not look at thoughts as enemies that need to be destroyed, nor as truths that must be followed. He saw them for what they truly are, temporary movements of the mind, arising and passing based on conditions, not permanent, not solid, not you. But this understanding is not easy because it challenges something very deep. It challenges the idea that everything happening inside your mind belongs to you. From childhood, you were taught to say, my thoughts, my feelings, my worries. And over time, this language became identity. The line between you and your mind disappeared so completely that you no longer see a difference. So when a thought appears, you don't observe it. You become it. You don't see fear. You are afraid. You don't notice regret. You feel like regret itself. You don't watch anxiety, you live inside it. This is why overthinking feels so powerful. Not because thoughts are strong, but because you are so closely identified with them that there is no space between you and the thinking. The Buddha described this as a form of illusion. Not an illusion in the sense that thoughts are fake, but in the sense that we misunderstand their nature. We believe they define us, when in reality, they are simply passing events. To understand this, imagine sitting quietly and watching the sky. Clouds move across it in different shapes, different speeds, different forms. Some are light and soft, others are dark and heavy. Some stay for a while, others pass quickly. Now imagine if you believed you were those clouds. Every dark cloud would feel like a threat. Every storm would feel like your identity. You would constantly be changing, constantly unstable, constantly affected by every movement. But in truth, you are not the clouds. You are the sky. The sky does not fight the clouds. It does not chase them away. It does not become them. It simply allows them to pass. This is the shift the Buddha pointed toward. You are not the thoughts that arise in your mind. You are the awareness in which those thoughts appear. And this awareness is quiet, stable, untouched. But because you have spent a lifetime identifying with thoughts, this separation feels unfamiliar at first. It may even feel impossible. The mind continues to speak, and you are pulled back into its stories again and again. This is natural. Awareness is not something that appears instantly. It is something that grows, slowly, gently, through observation. You begin by noticing small things. A thought arises. I wasted my time in the past. Instead of following it, you pause. You notice it. You say to yourself, this is a thought, not a fact, not a command, just a thought. And for a brief moment, there is space. In that space, something important happens. You are no longer inside the thought. You are watching it. This may last only a few seconds at first, but even those seconds are powerful, because in those seconds, you are free. Free from the story, free from the emotion attached to it, free from the automatic reaction. The thought may return again, stronger, louder, more convincing, but now something has changed. You have seen its nature once, and that seeing cannot be undone. So you observe again, and again, and again. Over time, this simple act of observation begins to transform your relationship with the mind. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer control you in the same way. They lose their authority, their urgency, their power to pull you completely into them. You begin to realize that not every thought needs attention, not every story needs to be followed, not every feeling needs to be amplified. This is not suppression, this is clarity. The Buddha did not teach people to silence their minds completely, because that would be another form of control. He taught them to see clearly, to understand deeply, to observe without attachment. Because when you truly see that a thought is just a thought, it cannot trap you in the same way. Even painful thoughts, even memories filled with regret or fear, begin to soften when they are seen from a place of awareness. They still arise, but they pass more easily, like clouds that no longer carry a storm. And in their absence, even if only for a moment, something else becomes visible. A quiet presence, a stillness that was always there, hidden beneath the noise. This stillness is not created. It is not something you build or achieve. It is something you uncover when the mind is no longer constantly pulling you away. And the more you rest in this awareness, the more natural it becomes. You begin to live differently, not reacting to every thought, but responding with clarity, not being carried away by every memory, but gently letting it pass, not fearing the mind, but understanding it. This is the beginning of true freedom, not freedom from thoughts, but freedom within them, because thoughts may continue to arise, but you no longer belong to them. And in that realization, something deeply peaceful begins to take root. A peace that does not depend on silence. A peace that is not broken by thinking. A peace that remains, even when the mind moves. This is what the Buddha pointed toward. Not a perfect mind, but a liberated one. The practice of letting go. There comes a moment, if you stay with this understanding long enough, when you realize something very simple and very difficult at the same time. You cannot control the mind the way you thought you could. For years, maybe your whole life, you believed that peace would come if you could just stop certain thoughts, remove certain memories, silence certain fears. You may have tried to push them away, distract yourself, argue with them, replace them with better thoughts. But no matter how much effort you put in, the mind continued. Because the mind does not respond well to force, the more you try to control it, the more it resists. The more you try to silence it, the louder it becomes. The more you fight a thought, the more attention you give it. And attention is exactly what keeps it alive. This is where the Buddhist path becomes very different from what most people expect. Instead of control, it teaches letting go, not giving up, not becoming passive, but releasing the need to hold, fix, or change every thought that appears. At first, this idea feels uncomfortable because it sounds like you are doing nothing, and the mind is used to doing something. It wants to fix. It wants to solve. It wants to control. But letting go is not nothing. It is a very active form of awareness. It means you are fully present with what is happening, but you are not interfering with it. You are not adding more resistance, more judgment, more struggle on top of what is already there. You are simply allowing. This is why the Buddha often compared the mind to water. When water is disturbed, it becomes unclear. You cannot see through it. The more you try to force it to settle by pushing it, the more you disturb it. But if you leave it alone, if you stop interfering, it naturally becomes still. The same is true for the mind. When you stop reacting to every thought, when you stop feeding every story, when you stop trying to control what arises, something begins to change on its own. Not instantly, but gradually, the mind begins to settle. Thoughts still come, but they pass more easily because they are not being held onto. They are not being examined, analyzed, or repeated again and again. They are simply seen and released. This is the essence of letting go. And yet, this is where most people struggle the most, because letting go requires trust. Trust that you do not need to follow every thought. Trust that you do not need to fix every feeling. Trust that not everything in the mind is important. But the mind will resist this. It will say, this thought matters. It will say, you need to figure this out. It will say, you cannot just let this go. And if you are not aware, you will believe it again. You will be pulled back into the cycle, thinking, reacting, thinking again. But now, you have something you did not have before. You have awareness. So when a thought arises, instead of immediately following it, you pause. You notice the urge to engage with it. You feel the pull. And instead of reacting, you simply watch. You allow the thought to be there, without pushing it away, without holding on to it. This is very subtle. You are not saying, I must get rid of this thought. You are not saying, I should not be thinking this. You are simply saying, this is here. And in that simple acknowledgement, without resistance, the thought begins to lose its intensity. Because resistance feeds it, but awareness releases it. The Buddha described this as understanding the nature of attachment. Attachment is not only to things or people, it is also to thoughts, to identities, to stories about who we are and what our life has been. Overthinking is a form of attachment. Attachment to the past. Attachment to imagined futures. Attachment to mental narratives that feel personal and important. And letting go means gently loosening that attachment, not by force, but by seeing clearly that holding on creates suffering. You begin to notice how exhausting it is to repeat the same thoughts, how heavy it feels to carry old memories again and again, how draining it is to constantly project into the future. And naturally, without forcing anything, a desire to release begins to grow. You start choosing not to engage, not because you are avoiding, but because you understand. You understand that holding on does not change the past. You understand that worrying does not control the future. You understand that thinking endlessly does not bring peace. So you let go, again, and again, and again. And each time you let go, even for a moment, the mind becomes a little lighter. There may still be waves, but they are not as strong. There may still be thoughts, but they do not stay as long. There may still be memories, but they do not pull you as deeply. And in between those thoughts, something begins to appear more clearly. Space, a quiet gap where nothing is being held, nothing is being resisted, nothing is being chased. At first, these moments are brief, just a few seconds, but they are enough. Because in those seconds, you taste something different, a mind that is not struggling, a mind that is not trapped, a mind that is simply present. And once you experience this, even in a small way, you begin to understand what the Buddha meant. Peace is not something you create. It is what remains when you stop holding on. Old age, then, is not a burden. It becomes a teacher. It gives you the space to see the mind clearly. It gives you the time to practice letting go. It removes the distractions that once kept you busy, so you can finally turn inward. And in that turning inward, if you are patient, if you are gentle with yourself, if you continue to observe without judgment, something profound begins to happen. The mind, which once felt like a storm, begins to calm, not because you controlled it, but because you stopped feeding it. And in that calmness, even if it comes slowly, even if it comes in small moments at first, you begin to discover a different way of being, a way of living where thoughts are no longer your master, where the past no longer traps you, where the future no longer scares you, where the mind is no longer something you must fight, but something you finally understand. And in that understanding, letting go becomes natural, effortless, quiet, and deeply freeing, making peace with the past. If you look closely, truly closely, at the thoughts that visit you again and again in old age, you will begin to notice a pattern. They are not random. They return to the same places, the same memories, the same moments, the same decisions that still carry weight inside you. It is as if the mind is walking through an old house, opening the same doors, touching the same objects, revisiting rooms that were never fully closed. And no matter how many times it walks through those rooms, it does not feel complete. It feels unfinished. This is the nature of the past when it has not been understood. The mind believes that by revisiting it, it can somehow change it. It replays conversations, imagining better words. It reimagines situations, creating different outcomes. It holds on to certain moments as if they are still alive, as if they can still be fixed. But there is a quiet truth that the Buddha pointed toward, one that is simple, yet very difficult for the mind to accept. The past is gone, not partially gone, not waiting somewhere, not returning later, completely gone. What remains is not the past itself, but the memory of it. And memory is not reality. It is a reconstruction, a mental image, a story shaped by your mind again and again. Yet, because it feels vivid, because it carries emotion, because it seems personal, you treat it as something real. And this is where suffering begins. Because you are holding on to something that no longer exists, and the mind is trying to solve something that cannot be changed. This creates a loop. The more you revisit the past, the more real it feels. The more real it feels, the more you engage with it. The more you engage, the deeper you fall into it. And over time, this loop becomes heavy. Not because the past itself is heavy, but because of the attachment to it. The Buddha did not teach people to erase their past or pretend it never happened. He taught something much more honest. He taught acceptance. Not acceptance as resignation, but acceptance as clarity. To see things exactly as they are, without adding extra resistance, without creating additional suffering on top of what has already occurred. This begins with a simple recognition. This happened. Not, this should not have happened. Not, I wish this was different. Not, I need to fix this. Just, this happened. And in that recognition, there is a quiet shift. Because when you stop arguing with reality, the tension begins to dissolve. But the mind will resist this. It will say, no, this matters too much. It will say, I cannot just let this go. It will say, this defines who I am. And if you listen closely, you will notice something. These are also just thoughts. Even the belief that you cannot let go is a thought. Even the feeling that your past defines you is a thought. And like all thoughts, they arise, they stay for a moment, and they pass. But only if you allow them to. This is where making peace with the past becomes a practice. Not a single decision, but a continuous, gentle returning. A memory arises. Instead of entering it, instead of analyzing it, instead of replaying it, you pause. You feel the emotion attached to it. Maybe it is regret. Maybe it is sadness. Maybe it is guilt. You do not push it away. You allow it to be there, fully, without judgment, without adding another story on top of it. And then, slowly, you bring your awareness back to your breath, back to your body, back to this moment. This is not avoidance. This is release. Because you are no longer feeding the memory with endless thinking. You are allowing the feeling to exist, but you are not strengthening the story around it. And, over time, something begins to change. The memory may still arise, but it feels lighter. The emotion may still be there, but it does not last as long. The grip of the past begins to loosen, not because you forced it, but because you stopped holding onto it so tightly. The Buddha often spoke about impermanence. Everything changes. Everything moves. Nothing stays the same. This includes your past. Not the events themselves, but your relationship with them. What once felt unbearable can become lighter. What once felt defining can become just a memory. What once felt like a wound can become something understood. But this transformation only happens when you stop resisting, when you stop trying to rewrite what cannot be rewritten, when you stop asking the past to give you something it no longer holds. Because the truth is, the past cannot give you peace. Only your relationship with it can. And that relationship changes the moment you choose to let go. Not by forgetting, not by denying, but by seeing clearly. You begin to understand that holding on to regret does not undo mistakes. Holding on to guilt does not change outcomes. Holding on to what could have been does not create a better version of your life. It only keeps you tied to something that is already finished. And slowly, gently, you begin to release that tie. You begin to forgive not always others first, but yourself. You begin to accept not always everything at once, but piece by piece. You begin to soften not because life was perfect, but because you no longer demand that it should have been. This is where true peace with the past begins, not in changing it, but in no longer needing to. And in that moment, something very quiet happens. The weight you have been carrying for years, sometimes for decades, becomes lighter. Not because the past disappeared, but because you finally stopped carrying it the same way. And in that lightness, you discover something unexpected, Space. Space in your mind. Space in your heart. Space to simply be, without constantly looking backward. Old age then becomes something different. Not a time of regret, but a time of release. A time where the past no longer controls you. A time where you are no longer trapped in what has already ended. A time where, for the first time, you are fully here. Not in memory, not in imagination, but in this moment, alive, aware, free from what once held you. And in that freedom, peace quietly begins to stay. Facing the fear of the future. There is something that quietly lives inside almost every human being, especially as life moves toward its later years. It does not always show itself clearly, but it is always there, beneath the surface, shaping thoughts, creating tension, influencing the way the mind moves. It is not the past. The past brings regret, memories, and unfinished emotions. But this is something different. This is fear of what has not yet happened, fear of what might come, fear of what cannot be controlled, fear of what cannot be seen. And in old age, this fear often becomes stronger, not because the future is more dangerous, but because the mind has fewer distractions to escape into. There is more time to think, more time to imagine, more time to create possibilities that feel real, even though they are not. The mind begins to ask questions that have no clear answers. What will happen to me? What if I become weaker? What if I lose everything? What if I suffer? What if I die? These questions do not come once. They return again and again, in different forms, at different times, sometimes softly, sometimes with intensity. And each time they appear, they bring with them a sense of unease, a tightening in the body, a subtle pressure in the chest, a feeling that something is wrong, even when everything around you is quiet. This is the nature of fear when it is created by the mind. It does not need a real situation. It does not need a present danger. It only needs imagination. And imagination, when combined with uncertainty, becomes powerful. The Buddha spoke very clearly about this. He taught that the mind, when unobserved, constantly moves into the future, trying to secure it, trying to control it, trying to make it safe. But the future, by its very nature, cannot be secured. It cannot be held, shaped, or predicted with certainty. It is always unknown. And the mind does not like the unknown. It tries to fill that space with thoughts, with scenarios, with stories that feel like preparation, but are actually just repetition. It believes that by thinking about the future enough times, it can reduce uncertainty. But it cannot, because the future does not exist yet. And this is the most important truth that most people never fully accept. The future is not something you are experiencing. It is something you are imagining. Every fear about what might happen is created in the present moment, inside the mind, using memory, expectation, and projection. It feels real because the body reacts to it. The heart rate changes, the breath becomes shallow, the muscles tighten. But what is actually happening right now, in this moment? Nothing. You are here. You are breathing. You are alive. The danger exists only in thought. This is why the Buddha emphasized returning to the present moment again and again, not as a philosophy, but as a direct experience, because the present moment is the only place where life is real. The past is memory. The future is imagination. Only this moment is actual. And yet, the mind spends most of its time everywhere else. In old age, this becomes more visible. The body may be still, the environment may be calm, but the mind continues to move forward, trying to grasp something that has not yet come. This creates a constant background of anxiety. Even when nothing is wrong, something feels unsettled. Even when everything is quiet, there is a subtle sense of worry. And this is exhausting, because you are living in a place that does not exist. reacting to events that have not happened, carrying emotions that are not rooted in the present. The Buddha's teaching does not ask you to deny the future or pretend it will not come. It asks you to understand its nature, to see clearly that thinking about the future is not the same as experiencing it, to recognize that fear is often not a response to reality, but a response to imagination. And once you see this clearly, something begins to shift. The thoughts may still come. What if something happens? What if things go wrong? But instead of being pulled into them, you begin to notice them. You begin to see, this is a thought about the future, and in that moment of seeing, there is a small space, a space between you and the fear. And in that space, you can choose not to follow, not to continue the story, not to build more scenarios, not to add more layers of worry. You simply return back to your breath, back to your body, back to what is actually here. This is not an escape. This is a return to reality. Because no matter what the mind creates, life is always happening now. And in this moment, there is usually far less to fear than the mind suggests. You are not dealing with every possible future. You are dealing with this single moment. And this moment is manageable. This moment is real. This moment is enough. But the practice requires patience. The mind will continue to move forward again and again. It will create new fears, new possibilities, new questions. And each time, you will have the opportunity to notice, to see the movement, to recognize it, to gently return, not with force, not with frustration, but with understanding. Over time, this practice changes the way fear operates. It does not disappear completely, but it loses its intensity. It no longer controls your actions. It no longer dominates your attention. It no longer feels overwhelming, because you see it for what it is, a passing movement of the mind. And when fear loses its grip, something else becomes possible, a sense of openness, a willingness to accept uncertainty, not as something negative, but as a natural part of life. Because everything has always been uncertain. Even when you were young, even when life felt more stable, the future was never guaranteed. It only appeared that way because you were not looking closely. Now, with awareness, you begin to see clearly. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is fully controlled. Everything is changing. And instead of resisting this, you begin to align with it. You stop asking life to be certain. You stop demanding that everything goes according to your expectations. You stop trying to secure something that cannot be secured. And in that letting go, there is a deep relief. Because you are no longer fighting reality. You are moving with it. Old age then becomes something very different. Not a time of fear, but a time of clarity. A time where you see the nature of life more clearly than before. A time where you understand that uncertainty is not the enemy, but a fundamental part of existence. And when you accept this deeply, not just as an idea but as an experience, the fear of the future begins to dissolve. Not because you know what will happen, but because you no longer need to. You trust the present moment. You trust your ability to face what comes when it comes. You trust that life will unfold as it always has, moment by moment, not all at once. And in that trust, the mind becomes lighter. The constant tension begins to fade. The need to control begins to soften. And in its place, something quiet and steady emerges. A calm awareness, a grounded presence, a sense that no matter what the future holds, you are not required to carry it all right now. You are only required to be here, breathing, aware, alive in this moment. And that is enough, more than enough. Because when you are fully here, the future loses its power over you. It becomes just another idea, another possibility, another movement of the mind. And you remain steady, present, free from what has not yet come, at peace, not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer afraid of uncertainty. And that is where true freedom begins. The quiet mind. If you have stayed with this journey, slowly, patiently, without rushing, something very subtle begins to reveal itself, not as a sudden breakthrough, not as a dramatic change, but as a quiet shift in the way you experience your own mind. At first, you may not even notice it, because it does not arrive with noise. It arrives with absence. The absence of constant tension, the absence of endless resistance, the absence of being pulled in every direction by every thought. And in that absence, something else becomes visible, a quiet mind. But this quietness is often misunderstood. Many people believe a quiet mind means no thoughts at all. They imagine complete silence, a blank state where nothing arises, nothing moves, nothing disturbs. But that is not what the Buddha pointed toward. A quiet mind is not a mind without thoughts. It is a mind that is no longer disturbed by them. Thoughts may still come. Memories may still appear. Feelings may still arise. But they no longer create the same reaction. They no longer pull you into their stories. They no longer define your experience. They simply pass like everything else. This is the difference between suppression and understanding. Suppression tries to force the mind into silence. Understanding allows the mind to move without losing your center. And this understanding is what you have been cultivating step by step, without even realizing how deeply it is changing you. You have seen how the mind creates overthinking. You have seen how it moves between past and future. You have seen how it attaches to thoughts and builds stories. You have seen how letting go softens its grip. And now, you begin to see something even more important. You are not inside the storm. You are the space in which the storm appears. This realization is not intellectual. It is not something you think about. It is something you begin to feel. Moments where thoughts arise, but you are not pulled in. Moments where a memory appears, but it does not carry the same weight. Moments where fear tries to form, but it dissolves before it fully takes shape. These moments may still be small. They may come and go, but they are enough to show you what is possible. Because once you experience even a glimpse of this quiet mind, you understand that peace was never something outside of you. It was never something you had to chase. It was never something hidden in the future or buried in the past. It was always here, covered but not gone, hidden but not lost, waiting beneath the noise of constant thinking. Old age, then, becomes something completely different from what most people fear. It is not just a time of decline. It is not just a time of loss. It is a time where illusions begin to fall away. The illusion that you are your thoughts. The illusion that you can control everything. The illusion that peace comes from outside. These illusions slowly weaken, not because you force them to disappear, but because you begin to see through them. And when illusions fall away, what remains is simple. Awareness. Not complicated, not dramatic, just clear. A knowing presence that does not need to chase, does not need to resist, does not need to become anything else. And in this awareness, life feels different. Even the same moments, the same surroundings, the same daily experiences begin to carry a different quality. You sit quietly, and it is no longer uncomfortable. You are alone. And it is no longer loneliness. You remember the past, and it no longer traps you. You think about the future, and it no longer scares you, because your relationship with everything has changed. Not the world, not time, not your circumstances, just your mind. And when the mind changes, everything changes. This is why the Buddha described peace not as something you achieve, but as something you uncover. It is not created. It is revealed when the conditions that disturb it begin to fade. And those conditions are not outside. They are inside. Attachment, resistance, identification with thoughts. As these begin to loosen, even slightly, the quiet mind begins to appear more often. At first, it may feel fragile. A few moments of stillness, followed by more thinking. A sense of calm, followed by a return of old patterns. This is natural, because the mind has been conditioned for many years. It will not change overnight. But now, something is different. You are no longer unconscious of it. You see the patterns. You recognize the loops. And most importantly, you know that you do not have to follow them. This knowing is enough. You do not need perfection. You do not need to eliminate every thought. You only need awareness, because awareness changes the way you relate to everything. A thought arises. Instead of becoming it, you notice it. A feeling appears. Instead of resisting it, you allow it. A memory returns. Instead of entering it, you observe it. And each time you do this, even in a small way, you strengthen something deeper than the mind. You strengthen your presence, your ability to remain here, steady, aware, not pulled away. And slowly, this presence becomes more stable, more natural, more effortless. You begin to rest in it, not as a practice anymore, but as a way of being. This is when the quiet mind becomes something you can trust, not because it is always silent, but because it is no longer disturbed. Life continues. Things still change. The body continues to age. Situations come and go, but inside there is a different experience, a space that remains untouched by constant thinking, a calm that does not depend on external conditions, a peace that is not easily broken. And this peace is not something dramatic. It is very simple, so simple that it can be overlooked. It is the feeling of being here, without needing anything else. No need to fix the past. No need to control the future. No need to change this moment. Just being, fully, completely, without resistance. This is the quiet mind. And in this quietness, something else becomes clear. You begin to see life as it truly is, not as the mind describes it, not as memory shapes it, not as fear imagines it, but directly, moment by moment, without distortion. This clarity brings a different kind of freedom, not freedom from life, but freedom within it. Freedom to experience without being trapped. Freedom to feel without being overwhelmed. Freedom to think without being controlled. And this freedom does not depend on age. But old age gives you a unique opportunity to see it more clearly, because so much has already been lived. So many illusions have already been tested. So many patterns have already repeated. And now there is space. Space to step back. Space to observe. Space to understand. And in that space, if you choose awareness over reaction, understanding over resistance, letting go over holding on, something very beautiful begins to unfold. A life that is no longer driven by the mind's endless movement. A life that is grounded in presence. A life that feels lighter even as time moves forward. And eventually, you begin to understand something that cannot be explained, only experienced. That peace was never far away. That freedom was never something to achieve. That the quiet mind was always possible, not in some distant future, not after everything is perfect, but here, now, in this moment. And as you sit with this, gently, without effort, you may notice something. The mind is still there. Thoughts may still arise, but you are no longer lost in them. You are here, aware, present, at ease. And in that ease, there is nothing missing, nothing to chase, nothing to fix, nothing to fear. Only this moment, unfolding exactly as it is. And for the first time, perhaps in a very long time, That is enough, completely enough. And in that completeness, the search quietly ends. One day, without even realizing when it happened, your mind will become quiet. Not because the world changed, not because life became perfect, not because every thought disappeared, but because you stopped chasing them, you stopped arguing with the past, you stopped fearing the future, you stopped believing every voice inside your head. And in that moment, something soft, something steady, something deeply peaceful begins to stay. You sit, and there is no pressure. You breathe, and it feels enough. You exist without needing to become anything else. This is what most people spend their entire lives searching for, without ever realizing it was always within them. Not in achievements, not in control, not in endless thinking, but in letting go. So, if your mind still feels busy, if thoughts still come again and again, don't be discouraged. That is not failure. That is the path. Just watch, just notice, just return again and again. Because slowly, quietly, without force, everything begins to settle. And when it does, you won't find something new. You will finally recognize what was always there. A peace that doesn't depend on anything. A stillness that cannot be shaken. A freedom that was never outside of you. And maybe then, for the first time in your life, you are not living inside your thoughts. You are simply here, aware, calm, free.